Old game bad. Old game bad.
Old game bad.
Old game bad. Say it with me. If any game is more than 3 years old, I look at it, I start laughing a little bit.
I think it looks terrible if it's more than 3 years old.
I start laughing at the pathetic nature of the losers who designed it in their own little caveman era, and then I just chuck it to the wolves.
I tell you what, I can't get past the first 15 minutes of gameplay if the game looks too terrible for me.
So why are we saying this? Well, because the gamer, or should I say the lamer, got him, put out a little article about Final Fantasy VII that is certainly something else. Now, look, I don't want to question that this person actually plays video games, but I don't understand how you could feel this way and enjoy video games as a medium, because the whole point of this article is essentially, when are we getting a real Final Fantasy VII remake, in which the writer goes on to talk about how they can't get into the original at all, and the remake timeline is too confusing because it needs the context of the original, but they don't want to play the original because it just looks too old.
Which I agree, it does need the context of the original, in my opinion. I think you get a lot more out of the games by playing the original first. But that being said, this person talks about how, like, they didn't get into gaming until they were an adult, so now they're, like, really stigmatized about games that look non-photorealistic, I guess. And it's like, I guess I don't understand why you can't sit down and play a game even though it's a little bit older.
Yeah, and to kind of talk a little bit about this more in detail, something that they said is essentially that they didn't play Final Fantasy VII Remake, but that everybody was talking about Rebirth and they wanted to play it, but it's kind of too late. Well, first off, it's not. The original Final Fantasy VII is pretty short. You don't need to play any of the spin-offs or tie-ins. They add to it, but you don't need to. You really just need the original, and then to play Remake. That's it. I mean,
and probably watch Advent Children, I'd say.
Yeah, but you don't have to.
No.
If you really don't want to. I mean, this would be a little bit, though, like Star Wars Episode 7 coming out and me bitching that I don't want to watch 1 through 6.
Because they're too outdated because they were made in the 80s, right?
But really what it comes down to is you just don't want to put the time into it.
Yeah, that's basically what it comes down to. It's like, you don't hear this argument from people about really old movies that came out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, people still love movies that came out back then.
Yeah, normal people that aren't insane.
I mean, think about, like, the Elvis movies. Those are really old. They're still in black and white. People still love them to this day.
RoboCop we recently watched through, and it's really fun.
People still love that to this day. It even got a video game recently.
Well, and something that they pointed out here that I do want to give them credit for is, in this article, they did say that the cool thing about 7 Remake is that unlike all of the incessant swarm of unnecessary remakes, and they went on and on about that for a minute, Final Fantasy VII Remake reinterprets the source material. It creates a meta-narrative by consciously diverging from FF7, and that divergence is the whole point.
And it makes it like an alternate universe.
Yeah, and that's totally true, and I agree, and props to them for giving it credit, but then they go on to say, I never played the original FF7, and playing Remake now would mean I lose a lot of the context in the game where context is the entire point. You know, going on to say that they were a year old when it was first released in 1997. Now, I
wasn't born yet, and I still played the game.
Yeah,
I was born in 2001.
And I was born in 94.
So
I was 3. And I didn't get into video games until the PS2.
I just don't understand, like, why you can't sit down and play a game even though it doesn't look, like, photorealistic, I guess. Like,
and that's the whole point is, I can't lie, the graphics are pretty whack. Then going on to talk about how they're not above, you know, like, not playing games because the graphics are bad. The weirdest example to me here was Fable Anniversary.
Yeah, they said they couldn't play that more than 5 hours because they thought it looked too ugly.
That was on the Xbox 360. I mean, it was a remaster of an original Xbox game, but, like, how high are your standards? You know, you pointed something out to me. So when you have this mindset, what is the point of playing anything? Because the thing that you play is going to look like shit in 10 years anyway, by the standards of what's out then.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it like this, purely.
The things coming out now, like things like Elden Ring or Stellar Blade, you might not believe it, but 25 years from now, they might look like shit in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, there were people thinking that PS2 graphics were like the peak of realism.
They thought that was insane. They thought that was the best thing they'd ever see in their lifetime.
But now you go back to a lot of those games, and I don't think they look bad at all, but like they don't look like today's games.
No.
And that's the point.
Yeah, and I don't know, I guess it's just kind of interesting to me.
Well, and something I think you wanted to talk about a little bit, too, was what you said about you weren't even born and you played through this game. Now, I think you had a little bit of a similar experience at first, where you weren't used to it.
At first it was a little off-putting to me, because it was very blocky. But then I kind of sat back and thought, you know what, what's the difference between me playing something like this and me playing something like Minecraft? Like, the graphics aren't exactly the most beautiful thing in the whole entire universe in Minecraft, but I still love the game, and I still enjoy playing it. And there's a lot of, like, story-driven games, like the Nancy Drew series that I like. Terrible graphics, but I love those games. So, why not give it a chance?
Right.
I mean, like, it's kind of like, for me, when I play the original Final Fantasy VII, it reminds me of reading a book, where I kind of imagine the characters more in my head than I do staring at the screen when I'm reading them. And I guess that's kind of more of how playing video games was back in the day, because, like, the graphics weren't all there to completely show things. You kind of had to imagine things and fill in the blanks in your mind.
And that was okay. And there was actually a lot of really cool graphics in these, too. I mean, I know that they...
I also think the cutscenes still look decent.
Yeah, they're fun. And I know nowadays when you look at Final Fantasy VII and you look at the backgrounds, they're not stunning, because they were pretty compressed, obviously, and they weren't working with HD technology and stuff. But the hand-created backgrounds of pretty much every scene in the world are actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, they look like hand-drawn.
And something that's weird to me about that, too, is that, there are tutorial after tutorial on YouTube of how to remaster the original Final Fantasy VII yourself using mods.
Yeah, how to make the characters look a little less blocky and a little bit more realistic.
You can either have them stay in chibi art style, you can have them go to a more realistic art style, you can do a mixture of both, you can have, there's whole mods that either clean up and use AI upscaling to fix the backgrounds, or that are hand redrawn by, mod creators. So, like,
But I'm too lazy to do all that stuff myself. I want Square Enix to just release it for me because I am a consumer.
Well, that's what it comes down to. That's what's funny about it is, like, so they go on to say this stuff about, like, how, well, I didn't have time, when I was growing up and stuff. It's like, okay, fair enough. Whatever, none of us have enough time for everything,
now
right?
I'm an adult and I just choose not to.
That's what it's really about, though. Like, you can go on this whole rant about how, like, the graphics are off-putting, but if they made the graphics perfect tomorrow, it sounds like you still wouldn't play it, because you'd come up with some excuse not to.
Well, also, majority of the original story for Final Fantasy VII is basically, like, remastered on Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, the mobile game, which of course won't be around forever, but it still has the chibi graphics, and it still has very similar a way of gameplay where you're kind of running around these, like, dungeon-y areas and picking up items and stuff. It's not the exact same game.
No, and it's not nearly as good.
No, but it's very similar.
And if you're lazy and you want a free-to-play way to just experience that story
with the exact story, yeah.
Yeah, as it comes out, there you go.
Some of the voice lines are slightly different, but it's basically the same exact storytelling.
Yeah, I guess the one caveat would be that it's not done.
Yeah.
Because they release it parts at a time.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting, though, that, like, if the argument is, well, they should remaster it, that there's already a way to do that with mods on PC and make it really good and even keep it true to the experience of what it was. But, like, I think one of the things that makes Final Fantasy VII so good is not actually the visuals. I don't think it really was ever the visuals.
No, it wasn't. I don't think it was supposed to be the visuals.
No, the visuals were supposed to be impressive because it was Final Fantasy's first real mainstream foray into 3D. Like, it was them trying to go into a more, like, less, like, pixel art type graphics of two-dimensional, which was beautiful in and of itself. Final Fantasy VI is, like, the peak of that. It's amazing. I would say Final Fantasy VI visually probably more impressive than 7, because 6 was like the peak of what they could do with 2D technology. 7 was like the lowest tier of what they could do with 3D, because it was their first try, right?
Yeah.
But it was still impressive because it was their first push into that. That was what it was impressive. You look at the jump between 7 and 8, it's night and day. You know, like a handful of years later,
and
still
on
the PS1.
Look at 10.
You know,
that.
9 builds a little bit more, and then 10 on the PS2. 10, people forget, was the first mainstream Final Fantasy that had voiced lines.
Yeah.
I was on a PS2. You know, like, are you going to say, like, well, 8 and 9 aren't worth playing because I can't hear the characters talking? I have to put imagination into their voice? No.
But then why, if...
Yeah, no. I agree with all that stuttering. That's pretty much, that could be the entire video, would be me sitting down recording and saying,
I guess, doesn't this mean that person wouldn't want to read books because they don't want to have to imagine the characters in their head?
They should remake it as a Michael Bay film.
Or they don't want to imagine, like, the voices in their head when, like, read something. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but it kind of seems like a lot of gamers are just kind of so lazy these days where, like, they have to hear every single thing that the person's saying. They can't just sit down and read the text themselves.
It kind of seems like a lot of people in general are really lazy. I mean, even I have seen this take with movies too. It's not nearly as common, but Star Wars A New Hope, that came out in the 70s. That's ugly. And it's like, but normal people don't really care. Normal people are sitting down to be entertained and enjoy it. And what they're there for is, you know, with a movie, things like cinematography, things like heart and soul, which you can tell. You can tell if somebody didn't put heart and soul into stuff. You know, people are going into video games with that same thing, except instead of cinematography, they're looking for heart and soul. They're looking for storytelling like they would in movies. But then they're also looking for gameplay. And gameplay is where I think 7, along with its story, really shines.
It's
in
beautiful.
Both of those departments.
I absolutely love the gameplay because it's very turn-based, and I absolutely adore turn-based games. And for some reason nowadays, everybody's like, oh, I don't like turn-based games, but I'll still play Pokemon!
Right, yeah, it's like turn-based is beneath them.
Now everything has to be, like, mashy.
Yeah.
You know, like, they even changed the gameplay completely in Remake and Rebirth to be more like Kingdom Hearts, which is fine.
I like it a lot.
It's a different continuity, it's fine, but I'm just saying, like, the person in this article kind of goes on to say, like, we need a complete remake of the original Final Fantasy VII with the same story, and let's change the gameplay,
That
too.
was the thing. I didn't even notice that they said that, and you pointed that out, and I had to go back and reread that, because it was so weird saying, basically, like, well, a lot of FF7's appeal is because of its jank, which I don't really necessarily agree with.
No.
And said that, you know, what if we had modern graphics and possibly different gameplay?
Because I guess nobody likes turn-based gameplay anymore, even though Pokemon still sells like hotcakes.
But what I don't understand about that, though, is, like, we got that. We got updated graphics and different gameplay. The only thing is there's a few changes to the story.
Which isn't very much in the first game.
No, it's more just, like, expanded. Like, you're meeting characters. I mean, honestly, I love the original Final Fantasy VII. I don't like to compare them in terms of what's better overall because they're different, and I think they're both equally good, actually, so far, in different ways. 7 had the benefit of being a full game at its release with a full story, but here's the thing with Remake and Rebirth, they've had so much more time to delve into that story and characters better. Like, even Aerith and Tifa are very clearly friends in the Remake timeline.
You don't see them talk to each other as much in the original.
No, not much at all. They're just kind of both hanging out in the same party, but they're not really interacting together much.
But then after certain things happen in the story that have to do with Aerith, Tifa kind of goes back and says, like, you know, she was one of my best friends. Yeah. Like, she even says that towards the end of the game.
Yeah, kind of acting like I really cared about her, but we didn't get to see enough of that.
Yeah.
We saw more Cloud caring about her.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, the Remake timeline, it does do a good job of that stuff, but the thing is, it enhances and expands on ideas, too, that the original couldn't do because of when it came out. But the original also has things that the Remake and Rebirth can't do. Like, for example, it's more purely turn-based combat with the action time gauge, obviously, and also, you know, some of the RPG mechanics of, like, they're different.
I really like the simplicity of it. How it was very straightforward, a very simple game where it's like, you do the combat and stuff, you buy new weapons, you find items, you're kind of like unraveling this whole mystery along the way of like what's the deal with this Sephiroth character, and what's the deal with Cloud, and why does he act like he's got two different people inside of himself?
Yeah, like why does he go back and forth with his personality?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it feels a lot. The reason I like it so much is it feels kind of like a detective game where you're like unraveling this mystery over time, and it's got such a charm to it that I think modern games now don't capture as well. And that's why I love the original Final Fantasy VII, and
the music too.
Yeah, it was like very simple. You know, it was very simple sounding, and it just brings back a lot of nostalgia and love and memories for me from when I was a kid, and I would play DS games and Game Boy games.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it kind of makes me sad when people look at it and don't give it a chance just because it looks a little ugly.
Well, and I also think that this flies in the face of media preservation and in the face of like what art is. Like, I can't imagine, you know, going up to Leonardo da Vinci and spitting in his face because somebody made a painting 100 years after him.
Yeah, because that painting looks better than his painting. It's like,
according to your standards.
But, like, his painting is still art. It's still a painting. It's still good.
And some people would prefer the way his painting looks over the new painting.
And I really like the whole time capsule of being able to go back and see these things. People right now are obsessed with like vintage stuff and like seeing how things were back in the old days, you know? But then when you look at a video game that was made that's basically a times capsule back in the 90s and how things were, they're like, ew, that's ugly.
There's a stigma around games. Like, if it's vintage clothing that you got from a thrift shop, it's cool and hip.
Uh-huh.
You know, if it's trying a vintage drink or a vintage beer or a vintage burger recipe
or
from the 1800s
movie.
or watching a vintage movie, it's like, oh, cool. You know, hipster culture. But if it's a video game, it's like, oh, that looks old. And I've always found that to be a weird mindset that I think is really captured in this article. And I think it's too bad. And the reason we're talking about it, by the way, is not just to pick on the article author. It's because this is, I think, a mindset that a lot of people have. And it's very unfortunate because I think they're missing out on a lot of really cool stuff. And it actually makes me a little worried. Now, I know in 100 years I will probably be dead. Maybe not, though. Maybe they'll figure out a way to keep me alive, but I'll probably be gone. But it makes me sad that, like, in 100 years, will people not play Elden Ring? Like, will no one want to touch it because they'll be like, you old?
Or a lot of the Assassin's Creed games that are coming out now.
Will they even be able to play it? Because when you have adults like this, you have to think this is just a nobody adult, like just a games journalist person. So, like, how many adults like this run these companies? How many adults like this, like, obsolete technology, bad, doesn't matter?
That's why we keep seeing backwards compatibility not be a thing anymore.
Well, that's my question, too, about, like, how long this technology will last. You know, like, let's say in 100 years everything is VR. Would you even have a way to play Final Fantasy VII?
No.
Because with people like
not.
this, having this mindset and this being proliferated more and more, it devalues and diminishes the importance of that media to the point where in 100 years, who will even remember it existed?
It's very disappointing and sad to see.
That's what makes me sad about it. Like, you're missing out on the amazing turn-based combat.
You're missing out on a piece of history, like video game history.
And what you said, I actually both agree and disagree with you. Yeah, it was a simple game, but you know what? It was as simple as you wanted to make it. You know why it was simple for you? It was your first Final Fantasy game.
That's true.
And it was a great way to jump into it.
Yeah, that's
true.
It was my very first game. Yeah.
You know who it's not simple for? Me, when I'm replaying it to get a specific romance option through dialogue at the Golden Saucer. Me, when I'm breeding chocobos to get a specific golden chocobo. To get a hidden materia.
To find the secret summons.
The people who want to go through the game and learn the enemy skills. There is a whole, almost Pokemon-like mechanic hidden in this game where if you have a materia equipped, you can learn certain enemy attacks. One of them, you only have the opportunity to learn it once in the whole game. One enemy uses it one time.
Yeah,
and
isn't that insane?
And if you never learned it or you never knew that, it's just a secret thing. Or you don't have it equipped,
yeah.
Too bad, you never learned it. And that's my point is, like, there's a lot of hidden mechanics in this and hidden things. Even the fact that there's whole mini games that people miss out on. Like, there's an archaeological dig minigame where you can go and dig up a key and
There's
then
like a tower defense minigame too.
And go back to one of the starting areas that you would never be able to get back into if you didn't do that minigame, the tower defense minigame. That's my point is, like, it's as simple as you want it to be, but if you never get into it and you don't give it a chance just because it looks old, you miss out on whatever it is.
There's also something I really like about that too, with going back to the Pokemon thing, is I kind of argue that in Remake and Rebirth, it's not as much like this, but with all of the characters that you get in the original Final Fantasy VII, when you keep leveling them up and giving them different items and stuff, it kind of feels like when you play Pokemon, you're trying to make your Pokemon the best it possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it feels to play with all of these different characters, in my opinion, in the first Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that they're, the original turn-based Final Fantasies, they focus a little more on skills that certain characters are better at, maybe, than others. I do think Remake and Rebirth do that more than you think, but I think most of your opinion on that is a little bit watching me versus feeling what it's like to play as Cloud versus Tifa. They look like they play the same because it's so fast, but they do actually do different things in the new games. I do think, though, yeah, there's a more stark contrast in the old ones. I just think it's really too bad that so many people are just willing to miss out on that and don't care, and they want the industry and the standards and what other people enjoy to change for them instead of them taking, 20 hours to go back and play the original, or 30 hours?
My final point to all of this is, do you even really like video games if you're not willing to sit down and try one, at least?
Right. Or give it a chance.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand, because usually when you really like something, especially like a genre of something, you'll sit down and at least give it a chance. And I guess I don't understand why people keep judging books by their covers on this. Do you actually even like video games, or do you just like modern video games? Yeah,
and modern as in right now when you're playing them, which probably won't be modern to you in 5 years.
Yeah.
That's kind of my question too, because at the end of the day, you're missing out on something really good. And you pretty much just say, I don't care that I'm missing out. I just want it to change for me.
Yeah.
And I just find that very backwards. I don't know. It irritates me. So let us know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe for more content. Jill, is there anything you want to talk about before we go?
Well, I do have an awesome shop called CosmoBunny.shop where I make really cool stuff. I get comic books and manga that have been damaged from places that can't really sell them, and a lot of times they'll throw them in the trash. So before they do that, I will usually either get them really cheap or get them for free, and I will turn them into art pieces with my resin, which I think is really cool. And then I also do handmade jewelry, and I hope you guys like that stuff. I'm showing it right here, I imagine.
Yeah, it's very awesome.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
But it'll be outdated in 5 years.
That's true.
According to this.
You can use code DJAY123 to get 10% off of your order.
Yeah, we hope to see you there. So we hope you have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone,
stay shui.